we know that we now have our audio event on the unarmed combat run animation working properly. We only have one foot set up though. So as you can see here, we only have one event in the cycle, and that's only corresponding to 1 foot in the run cycle here. So we want to add another audio event on the second foot right about here. So we're going to go through the same process by simply scrubbing through the preview until we get to the frame that we want, the part in the animation cycle that we want, and then click this button here, which is on the left of the timeline, and add event. Now, the next time our event editor window pops up, we will get the all of the same information that we put into previously, including the name of the string and including the name of our object. However, in function, we have to add our call event function. So that should be all that we have to do to add a second footstep to our run animation. So let's go ahead and test it. Click apply when this error comes up. And now we have 2 footsteps playing for the run cycle, which sounds much better. However, we are going to refine these footsteps a bit by making them a little bit more appropriate for our avatar, and also by adding the option to switch to wood footsteps when we step into an imaginary terrain that has wood on it. So let's go ahead and open up Wwise and go to our footstep_grass random container. Now, to my ear, these footsteps are a little bit too long and they're a little bit too heavy for our avatar. Our avatar is a female, and females generally have lighter footsteps. They're a bit quicker and they're not as loud. So we are going to pitch our footsteps up, and in Wwise, the unit of pitch that they use are cents. So we want to pitch up our footsteps by about 1200 cents. Now they are pitched higher. They are also faster. The sound files themselves are playing faster. And we're going to go ahead and save our project and generate our sound banks, because anytime we make a change, we need to save and generate. And then we're going to test this in Unity. All right, so that sounds a bit better. I like that much better. Okay, let's move on. So we know that we want grass footsteps, and we want to be able to switch to wood footsteps because we're going to pretend that there is grass and wood in our game. Now, in order to do that, let's start with the basics. We only need one sound bank because we can put multiple events in this sound bank, in the player sound bank. And again, footsteps are going to be playing on the player, so they are appropriate to put. We don't need to create a new sound bank. Under events, we have our footstep event, and that's going to stay the same as well, because anytime the player is going to make a footstep, it's going to call this footstep event. We don't need to worry about whether or not the avatar is walking in grass or walking on wood or concrete or anything else. It's all going to be handled by one event. Now, where the magic happens, where the real switching magic happens, is here in the audio tab in our sound effects objects. So the first thing that we're going to do is very basic. We know that we're also going to need wood footsteps. So let's go ahead and create another random container. Just like our footstep grass, we're going to create a random container called footstep wood. So create a random container and name it footstep_wood. Now, just like under footstep_grass, we have 1, 2, 3 audio assets for grass. we need to add and import our audio assets for our wood footsteps. So import audio files, right click on the footstep_wood random container, navigate to import audio files, click on the add files button, and under footsteps, on my desktop, again, I have my audio assets folder, and under footsteps, I have grass and wood. I'm going to open up my wood file and shift click to select all of my wood footstep files. And then they will populate the add files window, and I'm going to click import. So now on my footstep_wood random container, I can expand that, and I have all 3 of my wood footsteps. And I can test them by pressing F5, which will bring up my transport control. And with my footstep_wood object random container selected, I will then press play on the transport control. Okay, great. However, so now I have my random container set up with my wood footsteps. So we know that we have an event called Footstep, and this event is triggering a play action to play footstep_grass, which is this random container. So we need this event to be able to switch between footstep_grass and footstep_wood. So we need one object that will handle both of these random containers and switch between the 2 of them. And that's going to be our switch container object. So I'm creating a new switch container, and I'm calling it footstep_terrain. Now I need to move both my wood and grass footstep random containers into my switch container. And I can do that just by selecting them and then dragging and dropping them onto my footstep_terrain switch container. And here we can see in the hierarchy, I have my footstep_terrain switch container, and embedded in that are my footstep wood and footstep grass random containers. Now, just as a note, we are going to remove the pitch alteration that we made to footstep grass, because we're going to move that to the parent container, which is our switch container. And on our switch container, we're going to raise the pitch of our, 1200 cents. Now, that's going to raise the pitch of any events passing through our switch container by 1200 cents. We don't have to raise the pitch here on wood and grass separately, although we can do it just once here on the parent container. So even though we have a switch container, we're still not done. We still don't have everything that we need because we don't have a switch group and we don't have switches set up. Wwise and Unity will not know that whether to use wood or grass footsteps until we have a switch that can switch between them. And anytime we have a switch, we need to have a switch group. So switch groups are boxes which hold switches. And we can find switches here under Game Syncs. So in the Game Syncs tab, there's a folder called Switches, and there's a default work unit like there is for everything else in Wwise. When we click on Default Work Unit, we're going to see here that there's an option to create a new switch group. Click on that and name your new switch group Terrain. And then, now that we have a switch group, we can define switches that belong to that switch group. So under Terrain, we know we have 2 types of terrain random containers, right? We have a grass container, so we're going to make a grass switch, and we have a wood container. So we're going to create a new switch and call it wood. And that's all we have to do here in the Game Syncs tab. We now have a switch group with 2 types of terrain. So let's go ahead and go back to our audio tab. Click on our footstep terrain switch container, and here in the editor, the property editor, there's a section here called switch. And we need to define a group that will belong to the switch container. And we only have one switch group, and it's called terrain. So click on the double arrows, and under switch group, select terrain. And then for the default switch state, this is the state at which the switch will be selected, or the switch that will be selected when the game begins without any switches being flipped. And we're going to choose our grass switch. Now we're still not done because even though we have these grass and wood random containers, Unity and Wise don't know that the wood random container is associated with the wood switch. So we have these switches, grass and wood, but they're not defined. Wise doesn't know that when the grass switch is flipped, play the grass footsteps, and when the wood switch is flipped, play the wood footsteps. And we define that here in the content editor and assigned objects. So our assigned objects are going to show the two switches that we have, grass and wood. And it shows that grass is our default switch state as defined here in the switch section of the property editor. So we need to assign something, an object, to these switches. Now, it's pretty intuitive that for our grass switch, we are going to want it to play our grass footsteps. So all you have to do is click and drag your grass footsteps from the contents editor to the grass switch. And you'll see here that our footsteps grass random container game object is now assigned to our grass switch. And we're going to do the same thing with our wood random container. So now the switches know that when grass is switched to, we play grass, and when wood is switched to, we play wood. Now we can test that by going to Footstep Terrain, and we now see that in the transport control we have under our switches button our terrain switch group and our grass and wood switch. So we should be able to switch between the two. So now we're hearing grass. Now if I switch to wood, I should hear my wood footsteps. And lo and behold, I do. Okay, now that our footsteps are set up in the audio tab, we have to make sure that the correct game object is selected to be played in our footstep event. So here we could see that the action is to play, and it's still playing footstep underscore grass. So remember that you always want to audition your event to know how this will play in game. So if we select our footstep event and then audition it in the transport, we're going to hear grass no matter what, even if the wood switch is flipped, because it's playing footstep underscore grass, which is this random container. It's not playing this switch container, it's playing this random container. So we need it to play this switch container. So under events, again, we're going to go to the event editor, and we need to get rid of this footstep underscore grass object and replace it with the footstep terrain object. And if I click and drag footstep underscore terrain switch container right on top of this footstep underscore grass object, I get an error, or I get a confirmation window asking me if I'm sure I want to replace footstep underscore grass with footstep underscore terrain. Yes, I do. So now my event is playing footstep underscore terrain, and if I test it, when the wood switch is flipped, I'm playing wood footsteps, and when the grass switch is flipped, I'm playing grass footsteps. All right, so now I have switching footsteps set up in Wise. My Wise project is all set up. All I have to do is save my project and then generate my sound banks by pressing F7 and clicking Generate. All right, so let's go to Unity, and let's test our game. Okay, So I'm hearing my grass footsteps, but I don't have an opportunity to hear my wood footsteps because if you remember correctly in Wise, we set the default switch to grass. So when we start the game, the grass switch is going to be selected, and we're only going to hear grass footsteps until we flip the switch to play our wood footsteps. Now, how do we do that? Well, we need a trigger in the game to flip the switch to wood. So the way that we're going to do that is by creating a zone that will trigger the switch to flip to wood when we enter it. So let's go ahead and create an empty object in the hierarchy. Actually, I lied. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Let's go ahead and create 3D object cube. Now we see our cube was created here right at the feet of our avatar. Let's go ahead and move this behind the avatar, and then I want this to be a nice big zone for us to work with. So in the transform component of my cube object, make sure that cube is selected. In the transform component, under the scale fields, just set all of these boxes to 8. As you can see, that creates a nice big box for us, which we are going to use as our test zone. Now, I'm going to select my cube object, and I'm going to name it wood. And this is going to serve as the trigger for our for switching to our wood footsteps. So the first thing that we have to do is make sure that here in the box collider component of our wood cube collider here, we select is trigger because it is a trigger. It is triggering the switch group to wood. Now that that is done, we want to add a Wise component called AK switch. So click on Add Component, Wise, and then choose AK switch. Trigger on. Now this is how the trigger will be triggered. So right now it's triggered on start, which means once you press play, it's going to set that trigger, but we don't want to do that. The behavior that we want is when our avatar enters the box, she will be playing wood footsteps instead of grass footsteps. So that means that we want this to trigger on AK trigger, enter. Now, if I just select that from the drop-down, it's going to have start and AK trigger, enter both selected. Make sure that you only have AK trigger, enter selected. And then we want to make sure use other object is selected. Otherwise, it will trigger on the box object. It will trigger on the object which this component belongs to, which is the wood object here, this game object. But we wanted to use the avatar game object. So we have to make sure that use other object is clicked. Now we have red text, so that has to be taken care of. It says no switch is currently selected. So if we click on the red text, and it will pull up our switches folder, we will see the same folder hierarchy that we see in Wise, and we're going to see our terrain switch group and our grass and wood switches. Well, since we want our avatar to play wood footsteps when she enters this box, we want to choose the wood switch. So now we have AK switch component added to our wood box object, which can serve as terrain for in your game if you have wood terrain. And I can make this box invisible also. If I just, in the mesh renderer component, I deselect it, this won't be visible in game. But for testing purposes, we're going to keep the mesh renderer on. So I have my AK switch component, and it's triggering when I enter, and it's using my it's using another object instead of the box object, and it is the switch that it is triggering is terrain switch group and the wood switch. So let's go ahead and see if this works. So here I'm playing grass footsteps, and when I enter the box, I should trigger the wood switch, which, as we know, will trigger our wood footsteps. Lo and behold, it triggers our wood footsteps. Now, you'll notice that when I exit the box, it doesn't go back to grass footsteps, and that's because we have a trigger to switch to our wood footsteps, but we don't have a trigger to switch back to our grass footsteps, meaning that once a switch is flipped, it will remain flipped until we receive some kind of command to flip the switch to something else. So let's say, for testing purposes, that the behavior that we want is for the avatar to enter the box, which will trigger wood footsteps in the box, and then outside of the box, she will play grass footsteps. Well, this is really simple to set up. So let's make sure that our wood zone here, our wood box object, is selected. Let's make sure that our wood object is selected, and let's make sure that our wood object is selected, and then let's add another switch component. So add component wise AK switch, and this time, since we want our behavior to be such that when the avatar enters the box, it flips the wood switch, and when she leaves the box, it switches the grass switch. We want this one to trigger on AK trigger exit, and again, to make sure that only AK trigger exit is selected. We're going to use other object just like on our wood switch trigger, and this time on AK trigger exit, we want it to flip back to grass, right? So let's, for our switches, choose under our terrain group grass. Hit OK. And here we have a switch set up on enter to switch to wood and a switch set up on exit to switch to grass. Let's test. All right, in the box, she plays wood. Outside, goes back to grass. Inside, wood. Outside, grass. All right. So that does it for setting up zones which will switch between different styles or different types of footsteps that would simulate terrains that might be in your game or in your levels. You might have wooden walkways, for example, that are in grassy fields, and when you're on the walkway, you play wood footsteps, and off the walkway, you play grass footsteps. This is how you would go about setting that up. In the next video, we're going to talk about spicing up your footsteps with some Foley sounds, which we want when our avatar is running. She's wearing leather armor with some metal bits that are supposedly clinging around or making sounds as she runs. So we're gonna spice up our footsteps a little bit by adding some Foley sounds on top of our footsteps.